A girl sits alone by a spring of water in the middle of a desert, and no one in the world knows she is there. Her name is Hagar. She is a slave. She is Egyptian, far from home, pregnant and running from a mistress who treated her like a problem to be solved. The sun is high. The water in front of her is the only kind thing for miles. She has no rights. She has no plan. As far as the people who own her are concerned, she does not matter at all. And then a voice finds her. Not a voice from the household she ran from. A voice from heaven, calling her by name. Her name. The name of a runaway slave nobody important would have remembered. And when the moment is over, Hagar does something no one else in the entire Bible ever does. She gives God a name. She calls him El Roi, the God who sees me. Think about that. Not a king, not a prophet, not a patriarch with an altar and a flock. A pregnant slave girl by a spring is the first person in all of Scripture to look at God and say, I see what you are. You are the one who sees me. And here's the thing most of us miss. You have probably read the word God 1,000 times. You have read the Lord so many times your eyes slide right past it. But you may never have stopped to ask the simplest question, which name? Because in the original language, there is almost never just God. There is a specific one being named, and the English flattens all of it into a few plain words that hide what is really sitting there on the page. This is not a story about a word. This is not a story about translation. This is not a story about Hebrew grammar. This is a story about a God who refuses to stay anonymous. A God who keeps stepping into the worst moment of someone's life and saying, in effect, here is my name. Here is who I am for you, right now. And one day, at a bush that burns without burning up, a fugitive on the backside of a desert will ask God what to call him. And God will answer with a name so strange it sounds less like a name and more like a riddle. We will come back to that name, because it is not like anything else in this book. But first, we have to meet the three names hiding in plain sight, the ones you have been reading your whole life without ever seeing them. Open the very first sentence of the Bible. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. You read God, one short syllable, and you move on. But the Hebrew word sitting there is Elohim. And Elohim is not a soft word. It is a word about power, raw, world-making power. It is the name for the one who speaks and galaxies appear, who says light, and there is light. When you read Elohim, you are reading God as maker, the force behind everything that exists. Then there is a second word, the one your English Bible tucks under the title Lord. In Hebrew, it is Adonai, and Adonai means master. It is the word for the one who has the right to be obeyed, a personal authority, the one in charge. When you call God Adonai, you are saying something simple and hard at the same time. You run things, not me. But there is a third name, and this is the one almost everyone walks straight past. Open your Bible to nearly any page of the Old Testament and find the word Lord. Here is something you can see with your own eyes, even though you cannot hear it right now. In most Bibles, that word is printed two different ways. Sometimes it is ordinary, a capital L and the rest lowercase. But sometimes every single letter is a capital. And that second version, the one in full capital letters, is hiding the most personal name in the entire book. Those capital letters stand in for 4 Hebrew consonants, Y, H, W, H. Scholars call it the Tetragrammaton, which only means the 4 letters. We do not even know for certain how it was first spoken aloud, because the ancient Israelites came to treat it as too holy to say. And the name grows out of the Hebrew verb that means to be, to exist. So this is not really a title at all. It is closer to a declaration. I am. I was, and I am, and I will be. Hold on to that one, because we are going to come back to it. Here is the part nobody tells you. God does not hand all of these names over at once, like a list printed on the first page. He introduces himself slowly. A new name shows up almost every time his people walk into a new kind of trouble. And nowhere do you watch that happen more clearly than in the life of one man. An old man with no children and one enormous promise. Take Abraham. His name back then was Abram. He had just come home from a battle. His nephew had been dragged off by 4 kings, and Abram had chased the armies down and won. He was tired, bloody, and victorious. And as he came back, a mysterious king walked out to meet him. A king named Melchizedek, who was also a priest. He carried bread and wine, and he blessed Abram in the name of El Elyon, God Most High. After a battle, that name lands like a hammer. Because the question after every war is always the same. Who is really in charge here? Who is actually the highest power? And the answer comes back. Not the kings you just beat. Not the armies. El Elyon, the Most High. Years go by, and the promise God made to Abram, that his children would outnumber the stars, has not come true. He is now 99 years old. His wife is far past the age of having a baby. The promise looks dead. And it is right there, in that impossible silence, that God appears and gives a new name. El Shaddai. We usually translate it God Almighty. Though I should be honest with you, scholars still argue about what the word underneath actually means. Some say the Almighty. Some say the mountain. Some say the one who is more than enough. But the timing tells you the heart of it. God steps in as El Shaddai at the exact moment a 99-year-old man needs a God big enough to do the impossible. And then comes the hardest day of Abraham's life. God asks him to climb a mountain called Moriah and to give up the very son he waited 100 years to hold. You can feel the weight in every step up that hill. The wood on the boy's back, the silence between a father and a son. And at the last possible second, with the knife already raised, God stops him. And there, tangled in a thicket, is a ram, a substitute, something to die in the boy's place. And Abraham names that mountain Yahweh Yireh, the Lord will provide. Not provided in the past, will provide. He took the worst moment of his life and turned it into a name for God's faithfulness that had not even arrived yet. You might wonder how seriously the ancient world took all of this. Here is one window into it. The Jewish historian Josephus, writing not long after the time of Jesus, retells the scene at the burning bush, the moment God reveals his name to Moses. And right at that point, Josephus stops. He tells his readers he is not permitted to say anything more about that name. He will not write it down. To him and to his people, the name of God was something you handled the way you handle fire. Carefully, reverently, never as if it were ordinary. So watch the pattern taking shape. A God of power, a God of authority, the Most High after the battle, the Almighty in the impossible wait, the provider on the mountain of sacrifice. One God, but a brand new introduction for every new place his people found themselves standing. And we have only reached the edge of the desert. Because the moment Israel becomes a nation, the names start coming faster. Before we go on, let me say the pattern out loud, because it is the key to everything that follows. God never dumps all his names on you at once. He introduces himself one at a time, a new name for every new kind of trouble. Power when you face chaos, the Most High after the battle, the provider on the mountain. And we are only halfway there. So if this is opening your eyes to things you have read for years but never really seen, subscribe and stay with me. There are far stronger names still coming. And I want to hear from you down in the comments. Which name have you needed most? Hold that question. We will get there. Israel walks out of Egypt as free people for the first time in 400 years. They cross the sea on dry ground. And 3 days later, they are dying of thirst. Then they find water. And the water is bitter, undrinkable. Picture it. You have just watched God split an ocean, and now you are standing over a spring you cannot even drink, with children crying and the desert stretching out in every direction. The people turn on Moses, and God shows Moses a piece of wood, tells him to throw it into the water, and the bitter turns sweet. And right there, beside that spring, God gives himself a new name. Yahweh Rapha, the Lord who heals you. Not just water made clean, a God who steps into the place where everything has gone bitter and makes it something you can live on. Keep moving through the desert and the names keep coming. A raiding people called the Amalekites attack, and Moses climbs a hill to watch the battle with his hands raised toward heaven. As long as his hands stay up, Israel wins. But his arms grow heavy. So 2 men, Aaron and Hur, stand on either side of him and hold his hands up until the sun goes down. And when the fighting is over, Moses builds an altar and names it Yahweh Nissi. The Lord is my banner, the flag you fight under, the thing you lift up when your own strength is gone. Then there is a man hiding in a hole in the ground. His name is Gideon, and he is beating out wheat at the bottom of a winepress so the enemy will not see his food and steal it. He is the smallest man, in the weakest family, in his tribe. He is afraid of everything. And an angel walks up to this trembling man crouched in a pit and calls him a mighty warrior. Gideon argues. Gideon doubts. But God says to him, "Peace be with you. Do not be afraid." And Gideon builds an altar and calls it Yahweh Shalom. The Lord is peace. A frightened man in a hole gave us one of the most beautiful names in the Bible. A shepherd boy gave us another. David spent his nights guarding sheep, so he knew exactly what a shepherd does. Find the water, fight off the lion, carry the weak one home. And when David reaches for a name for God, he reaches for the one job he understood in his bones. Yahweh Rohi, the Lord is my shepherd. The best-known line in the whole Bible came from a teenager who smelled like sheep. But that same shepherd boy grew up and walked onto a battlefield where a giant was waiting. Goliath stood there in bronze armor, with a spear like a fence rail, and an entire army frozen behind him in fear. And David, with 5 smooth stones and no armor at all, called out a name. He did not come in the name of a king. He did not come with a sword. He came, he said, in the name of Yahweh Sabaoth, the Lord of armies. A boy stood in front of a giant and announced that the real army was the one nobody on that field could see. And the names keep going, all the way to the edge of the Bible. When the prophet Jeremiah looks ahead to a coming king, he calls him Yahweh Tzidkenu, the Lord our righteousness. And the prophet Ezekiel ends his entire book with a single name for the restored city of God. Yahweh Shammah. The Lord is there. For a people terrified that God had left them for good, the last word is a promise that he is present. Now I have to be honest with you here, because being honest is the whole point. You will find lists online that count these up as the 12 names of God, as if each one stood on its own like Elohim or the great 4-letter name. But that is not quite what is happening. Most of these are altar names and place names, the word Yahweh joined to a description of what he just did. Yahweh who heals, Yahweh my banner, Yahweh is peace. They are real, and they are in the text, but they are titles built on top of the one personal name. And while we are being honest, The word Jehovah that you may have grown up singing is not the original pronunciation at all. It came centuries later, when scribes blended the vowels of the word Adonai into the 4 consonants of the holy name. It is a beautiful accident of history. But it is an accident. But it gets stranger, because for all these names, healer, banner, peace, shepherd, provider, there was one name God gave that was not a description of anything he did. It was not about an action at all. It was a name about his very being. And he gave it to a fugitive standing barefoot in front of a bush that would not stop burning. So before we get there, let me ask you the question I promised. Out of all of these, the one who sees you, the one who provides, the one who heals, the one who is peace, which name is the one you need to hear most right now? Keep it in your mind, because the last 2 names change everything. So now we come back to the bush. Moses is 80 years old, and as far as he can tell, his life is already over. Once he was a prince in Egypt. Now he is a shepherd on the backside of a desert, a wanted man who killed someone and ran, tending another man's sheep in the middle of nowhere. 40 years of nothing. And then he sees it. A bush, on fire. But the fire is not eating it. The branches burn and are not consumed. And from inside the flame, a voice calls his name and tells him to take the sandals off his feet, because the dirt he is standing on has just become holy ground. And then God tells this washed-up shepherd to march back into the most powerful empire on earth and demand the release of an entire nation of slaves. Moses has one question. The question: if I go to these people and say God sent me, they are going to ask me your name. What do I tell them? Who do I say you are? And God answers with the strangest name in the whole Bible. Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh. I am who I am. Sit with that, because it barely sounds like a name at all. Every other name describes something God did. Healer, provider, banner, shepherd. This one describes nothing he does. It describes what he is. It grows out of the same Hebrew verb buried inside those 4 sacred letters, the verb that simply means to be, to exist. God looks at a terrified man and does not hand him a list of credentials. He hands him existence itself. I am. I always was. I always will be. Whatever you walk into, I will already be there, being exactly what you need me to be. He did not give Moses a definition. He did not give him a lecture. He did not give him a doctrine to memorize. He gave him a name he could carry into Pharaoh's throne room, into the wilderness, into every impossible thing that was coming. And here is a way to feel what just happened. Think about how many names you answer to. To your patients, you might be doctor. To the people on your street, you are the last name on the mailbox. To a stranger, you are sir or ma'am, a face in a crowd. But somewhere there may be one small person who runs to the door and calls you something no one else on earth is allowed to call you. Dad. The most powerful version of you bends all the way down for the most personal name you have. God is like that. There is a public name the whole earth can read in the mountains and the stars. Elohim, the Maker, the power behind everything that exists. And there is a closer name, a covenant name, that he saves for the ones he pulls in near. Now watch what happens next, because this is where the entire Bible turns. Move forward about 1500 years. A teacher is standing in the temple courts in Jerusalem, surrounded by religious men who are furious with him. They throw Abraham in his face. "Who do you think you are?" they say. "You are not even 50 years old, and you talk as if you knew Abraham?" And he answers them with 5 words that nearly get him stoned to death where he stands. Before Abraham was, I am. Listen to that again. Not before Abraham I was. That would have been ordinary. He said, I am. In Greek, ego eimi. He reached back across 1,000 years, past the desert, past the burning bush, and he picked up the name that was too holy to speak and laid it on himself. And the crowd understood him perfectly. That is the exact reason they bent down for stones. They knew precisely which name he had just taken. And there is one last thread that ties the whole thing shut. By the time of Jesus, the Hebrew scriptures had already been translated into Greek, and the translators had taken that unspeakable four-letter name and rendered it with one Greek word, Kyrios, Lord. So when the first Christians stood up and called Jesus Lord, they were not being polite. They were not handing him a courtesy title. They were reaching for the very word the Greek Bible used for the name no one dared pronounce, and saying it belonged to a carpenter from Nazareth. The God who told Moses, I am, had put on skin and sandals and walked the same dusty roads as Hagar, as Abraham, as David. The name from the fire now had a face. So what do you do with all of this? Here's the first thing. God has many names because no single one could hold all of who he is. One God, many introductions. Behind the flat English words God and Lord stands Elohim the Maker, Adonai the Master, and the four-letter name too holy to speak. He is not smaller than your words for him. He is far, far bigger. Here's the second thing, and this one is for you, today. There is a name of God shaped exactly like the trouble you are standing in right now. If you feel unseen, he is El Roi, the God who sees you. If you are staring at a bill you cannot pay or a door that will not open, he is the one who provides. If something in your life has gone bitter, he is the one who heals. If you are afraid, he is peace. You do not have to climb a mountain to find the right name. You just have to call. And here is the last thing. The same God who thundered, I am, out of a burning bush, the one whose name strong men were afraid to say out loud, that God invites you to call him something almost shockingly small. Abba. It is the word a child uses for a father. Not the Almighty, not the Most High. Dad. The most powerful name in the universe leans down and answers to the most personal one you have. So let me ask you one more time. Which name of God do you need most right now? The one who sees, the one who provides, or the one who is peace? Tell me down below. He never gave you all his names at once. He gives them to you one at a time, right when you need to know he is exactly that.